I had never been to Kyoto in autumn. When my son Ryan suggested it, I laughed at the absurdity. A single mother from a small coastal town in Maine suddenly jetting off to Japan. It sounded like something from a travel magazine, not my life. But Ryan had insisted. "Mom," he'd said over the phone, his voice firm but warm, "you've given me everything. Let me give you this." He was 24 now, working abroad as a freelance photographer. I hadn't seen him in person in nearly 2 years. Our contact reduced to late-night video calls and the occasional package of foreign treats he'd send my way. When I landed at Kansai Airport and saw him waiting, taller, broader, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before, it hit me just how much time had passed. Kyoto in November was a mosaic of golds and reds. The air was crisp, scented faintly with roasted chestnuts from street vendors. Ryan had booked us a small ryokan, a traditional inn with sliding shoji doors and tatami mats. It was tucked away down a narrow street lit by paper lanterns, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. Our first evening, we wandered through the Gion district, the cobblestones slick from a light drizzle. We ducked into a tea house where steam curled from porcelain cups and shadows danced on the walls. Ryan told me stories from his travels, photographing street festivals in Thailand, hiking volcanic slopes in Indonesia. While I listened, my hands cupped around the warmth of the tea. There was something in the way he looked at me that night. Not the quick glances of a distracted young man, but a steady, lingering gaze, as though he was memorizing me. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the intimacy of being reunited after so long. The next day, he took me to Arashiyama, where the bamboo forest rose like green cathedrals above us. The wind whispered through the stalks, and for a moment, we were the only two people in the world. He reached for my hand as we walked, a small gesture he didn't let go of right away. That night, the onsen, a small, open-air hot spring, was quiet. The staff had given us the late slot, knowing most guests preferred earlier hours. Lanterns flickered along the edge of the steaming water, their glow soft against the dark. "Feels unreal, doesn't it?" Ryan said as we slipped into the water. I nodded, trying to ignore the way my heart was beating a little too fast. Like a dream. We talked about everything, his childhood memories of sledding down the hill behind our house, the first time he'd used my camera without asking, the day he left for college. The steam curled around us, blurring the edges of the world. At one point, he moved closer, his shoulder brushing mine under the water. Neither of us pulled away. There was a pause, one of those moments that stretches too long to be casual. I felt his eyes on me again, that same steady gaze from the tea house. My chest tightened with something I didn't want to name. We didn't speak of it. We just stayed there under the lantern light, the warmth of the water making it impossible to tell where my body ended and the air began. For the rest of the trip, the air between us was different, charged in a way I couldn't explain. On the train rides, his knee would press lightly against mine. In the crowded markets, his hand would linger on my back as he guided me through the throng. At night, over quiet dinners, our conversations dipped into places they had never gone before, filled with truths we hadn't dared to share. When it was time to say goodbye at the airport, his embrace was tighter than I expected, his breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "I don't want this week to end." Neither did I. And as I boarded my flight home, I knew it wasn't just the beauty of Kyoto I'd be carrying with me. It was the weight and the pull of a line we had stepped over, one we couldn't ever fully erase. The first week back home was strange. It wasn't that I missed Kyoto itself, though I did, but the absence of Ryan felt sharper than I wanted to admit. I'd catch myself glancing at the empty chair across from mine at breakfast, hearing his voice in my head as though he were still there. Our daily messages picked up almost immediately. They started innocent, a photo he'd taken of the river at sunset, a link to a song he said reminded him of me. But soon they became longer, lingering conversations late into the night. He'd call from his tiny apartment in Tokyo, hair mussed from sleep, the city lights flickering through the window behind him. I'd curl up on my couch, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to him breathe between stories. Sometimes we didn't even need words. One night, he asked quietly, "Do you ever replay moments in your head?" My pulse quickened. What kind of moments? There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the faint hum of his heater in the background. Like the onsen. Or that walk through the bamboo forest. You ever think about them? I lied. Not really. But the truth was, I thought about them constantly. The way the steam curled around his face under the lantern light. The warmth of his hand against mine as we stepped between the towering bamboo. The way neither of us pulled away when we should have. Weeks passed, and his messages took on a teasing edge. He'd ask what I was wearing on lazy Sunday mornings, then laugh it off before I could answer. He'd send me photos of his dinners with captions like, "Missing our meals together." Then, one evening, his voice turned serious. "I'm coming back to the States in February. Just for a week. I want to see you." I hesitated, my fingers curling around the phone. "Are you planning to see friends too?" "Maybe," he said. "But mostly you." When the day came, winter had gripped our little town in its icy hold. The streets were lined with snowbanks, the air sharp and clean. I met him at the train station, his tall frame standing out easily in the small crowd. He smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile that started in his eyes before reaching his mouth. "Hi, Mom." I expected a quick hug, but his arms lingered around me, his breath warm near my temple. That embrace carried the same unspoken electricity I'd felt in Kyoto, if not stronger. Back at the house, he dropped his bag in the hallway and looked around as though seeing it differently. "Feels smaller than I remember," he said, running his hand along the banister. We fell back into old rhythms, tea in the kitchen, slow conversations at the table, but something had shifted. His eyes lingered more. His voice softened when he said my name. That night, a snowstorm rolled in, wrapping the town in silence. We stayed in, the fire crackling in the living room. I made cocoa, the way I used to when he was a boy. "You always make it too sweet," he teased, sipping from his mug. "You always drank it anyway," I replied. He smiled, leaning back into the couch. "Some things don't change." His knee brushed mine, a casual touch that didn't feel casual at all. We sat like that for a long time, the snow falling thick outside the window. At one point, he reached for the blanket draped over the armrest, tossing one end over my lap. His fingers brushed my thigh, brief, but deliberate. I didn't move away. The silence stretched between us, and the line we'd never spoken of felt closer than ever. I could feel the air shift, the warmth of him beside me, the awareness that if either of us leaned in just slightly, something irreversible would happen. But we didn't. Not that night. Still, when I went to bed, the echo of his touch lingered long after the fire had gone out. The snowstorm didn't let up the next day. By morning, the world outside was buried under a thick, untouched blanket of white. The roads were closed, the radio warning against travel, and the windows wore frosty patterns that turned the daylight into a soft haze. Ryan was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, hair tousled, wearing one of my old sweatshirts. It hung loosely on him, but the sight made something inside me tighten. "Coffee's on," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Thought I'd let you sleep in." "Thanks," I murmured, wrapping my cardigan tighter. We spent the morning in a strange rhythm, together, yet skirting the edges of something neither of us would name. He read on the couch, legs stretched out, while I moved between the kitchen and the living room. Every so often, I'd catch him watching me, his gaze steady and unreadable. By afternoon, the silence in the house was thicker than the snow outside. "Power might go out," he said, peering at the gray sky through the window. I tried to keep my voice light. "Guess we'd better stockpile blankets and snacks then." Sure enough, just after sunset, the lights flickered once, twice, and died. The house fell into darkness, save for the dim orange glow of the fireplace. Ryan appeared in the doorway, holding a flashlight. Well, guess it's just us and the storm. We ate by the fire, bread, cheese, the last of the cocoa, our shadows moving on the walls. The wind howled outside, but in here, the warmth felt almost stifling. Afterward, we sat on the rug in front of the fireplace, the heat on our faces, the rest of the room fading into shadow. The blanket from the couch was draped loosely around us, his arm brushing mine whenever either of us shifted. "I forgot how quiet it gets here in winter," he said, his voice low. "Quiet can be nice," I replied. He turned to look at me, and in the flickering light, his expression was different. Open, intent, almost searching. "Yes, sometimes." The space between us felt charged. I could hear the subtle shift in his breathing, could feel the faint warmth radiating from him. My pulse beat hard in my throat. "Ryan," I started, though I didn't know what I meant to say. His eyes didn't move from mine. "What?" For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fire popped, sending a small ember spiraling upward. I became acutely aware of every detail, the way his knee pressed lightly against my leg, the faint scent of wood smoke on his sweatshirt, the slow, measured way he inhaled as though holding himself back. "You're staring," I said finally, attempting a smile. "Maybe I am." The air thickened between us, the storm outside a distant hum. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming to move, to break the tension, but another part of me, quieter and far more dangerous, wanted to stay right there. His hand shifted under the blanket, fingers brushing the back of mine. It was a small touch, almost nothing, yet it felt like crossing a threshold. Neither of us pulled away. For a long moment, we just sat there, breathing in sync, the firelight painting shadows across his face. Then he leaned in, not enough to close the distance, but enough that I could feel the heat of his breath. The world seemed to narrow to that single point between us. I don't know how long we stayed like that before I finally stood, my legs unsteady. "I'm going to bed," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan didn't try to stop me, but as I turned, I caught the look in his eyes, the unspoken acknowledgement that we were already too close to turning back. I had just risen to my feet when his voice stopped me. "Don't go," Ryan said quietly, not demanding but certain. "Stay here, with me." I turned slightly, my heart thudding. "It's late, Ryan." He stood too, stepping just close enough for the firelight to catch in his eyes. "I'll pour us some wine. Bring more snacks. We don't have to sleep yet." I wanted to refuse, to tell him I was tired, that the storm and the dim light and the way he was looking at me were making me reckless. But instead, I found myself nodding, lowering back down onto the rug as he disappeared into the kitchen. The soft clink of glasses and the rustle of a snack bag carried over the low roar of the wind outside. When he returned, he had a bottle of red in one hand, 2 glasses in the other, and a plate with crackers and slices of cheese balanced on his forearm. "You've got it all planned, don't you?" I teased, my voice thinner than I intended. He smiled faintly, pouring the wine. "I just don't want the night to end." We sat close again, the blanket over both of us. The first sip of wine was warm and heady, curling into my chest. The fire popped softly, filling the spaces between our words. At first, we talked about safe things, his travels, my work, half-forgotten memories from when he was little. But slowly, the conversation slipped into deeper waters. "You know," he said, staring into the fire, "I never realized how much I missed this. Just being here with you." The words lodged in my throat. I missed it too. His eyes found mine again, steady and unblinking. "It's different now, though." I knew what he meant, and I also knew I should steer us away from it. But I didn't. "Yeah," I said softly. "It is." We fell into silence, but it wasn't empty. His knee pressed more firmly into mine beneath the blanket. Our shoulders touched, neither of us moving away. When he reached for the wine bottle to refill my glass, his fingers brushed mine. Not by accident this time. They lingered, warm and deliberate. I looked down at our hands, then back at him. The firelight painted his face in gold and shadow, his gaze searching mine for something unspoken. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking." "About?" I hesitated, my pulse quickening. "You." Something in his expression shifted, a subtle breaking of the careful restraint he'd been holding. His hand slid fully over mine now, his thumb brushing slowly across my skin. "Then keep thinking about me," he murmured. The room felt smaller, the air denser, every sense trained on him. The storm outside was forgotten. There was only the fire, the wine, and the way his presence seemed to draw me in without force. Only gravity. We didn't move quickly. There was no rush. Just a steady closing of the space between us until I could feel his breath, the warmth of it mingling with mine. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with something that felt dangerously like inevitability. I should have stood up again. I should have said goodnight. Instead, I stayed. We sat there long into the night, speaking little, the silence between us louder than any words could be. And by the time the fire burned low to embers, our closeness had shifted into something we could never pretend away again. The fire had burned low, casting the room in a soft amber glow. The only sound was the faint crackle of the last embers and the wind pressing against the windows. I was staring into the flames, trying to ignore the thundering in my chest, when I felt his hand slide up behind me. Fingertips brushed through my hair, slow, deliberate, and then began to work gently at my scalp. The sensation caught me off guard. I froze, my breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a sigh. His fingers moved with unhurried care, combing through, circling at my temples, tracing along the base of my neck. I was speechless. It was so unexpectedly tender, so disarming, that I could barely think. My eyes fluttered shut on their own, and I fought to keep any sound from slipping out, my lips parting just enough to pull in air. He leaned closer, his movements never breaking their rhythm, his voice low against my ear. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to do this," he whispered. A shiver ran straight through me, sharp and warm all at once. Before I could respond, before I could even open my eyes, his hand stilled in my hair, and then his lips were on mine. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't clumsy. It was slow, certain, as if he'd been holding this moment for years and wasn't going to waste a second of it. The world outside vanished. There was no storm, no fire, no time. Only the heat of him, the faint taste of wine on his mouth, the strength in the hand still cradling the back of my head. For a breathless moment, I didn't think about anything except how completely I was giving in. When we finally pulled back, I couldn't meet his eyes right away. My pulse was wild, my thoughts tangled between shock, disbelief, and something dangerously close to relief.
He didn't speak.
He just kept his hand in my hair, his thumb brushing lightly against the curve of my neck, as if to make sure I wouldn't drift too far away. And I didn't move, because deep down I already knew there was no going back from this. I woke to the pale gray light of winter mornings spilling through the curtains. For a moment, I wasn't sure if it had all been a dream. The fire, the wine, the way Ryan's hand had moved through my hair, the way his mouth had finally found mine. But then I felt the echo of it, still alive under my skin, and I knew. The house was silent. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside still and white, every branch and rooftop softened under the snow. I sat there in bed, staring at the light on the ceiling, my thoughts a restless tide. I should get up. I should make coffee. I should act as though nothing had happened. But when I finally stepped into the hallway, the faint scent of fresh coffee was already in the air. Ryan was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, his hair mussed, wearing the same sweatshirt from last night. He looked up as soon as I entered, and something unspoken passed between us. Not a question, not an apology, just recognition. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning." My voice was almost steady. Almost. He poured me a mug without asking and slid it across the counter. "Sleep okay?" I hesitated. "I don't think I slept much." His eyes lingered on mine. "Me neither." We drank in silence for a few moments. I could feel the weight of what we weren't saying. Heavy, but not suffocating. Finally, he set his mug down and took a step toward me. "Are you sorry about last night?" The question lodged in my throat. I searched his face, looking for doubt, for regret. But there was none. Only quiet certainty, the same as when he'd asked me to stay by the fire. "No," I said at last. My voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not sorry." Something in his shoulders eased. He reached for my hand, his thumb tracing across my knuckles. In the morning light, the gesture felt different, not hidden, not stolen, but chosen. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," he said. "But I don't want to pretend it didn't happen." I should have been afraid of those words, but I wasn't. If anything, I felt the quiet pull toward him grow stronger. I nodded, unable to look away from him. "Then we won't." He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him against the cool morning air. His forehead rested lightly against mine, and for a long moment, we just stood there, no rush, no hesitation. The snow outside gleamed in the early light, untouched. Inside, I realized there was no more before to go back to. There was only this, whatever it was, wherever it would lead, and the fact that neither of us wanted to let it go.